To order, and first let me just begin. It's great to see everybody, the entire team, all the colleagues. Hope you've had a enjoyable summer. Got a chance to be with family and friends and meet with your constituents through the summer, and it was. We have. I may be a little biased, but I was just saying to the clerk and others that probably I'll just say the hardest working committee on the Hill, and without just based on yes, we should pat yourselves on the back for the amount of meetings we had, 60 plus meetings this last session, and I know we're going to have a very busy session, members, this time. So this is our welcome to meeting number 57 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, and pursuant to the Standing Order 108(2), the committee's meeting to discuss the current state of fiscal federalism in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Okay. And I would, Mr. Beach?
I don't want to interrupt anything, but if it's an appropriate time, we just have this administrative motion that was put forward by Mr. Baker. It's within the 48 hours, but I don't think it's controversial. I think it was agreed upon by all of our whips. So I just wanted to see if there was anonymous consent. Oh, it's the first committee back. Unanimous consent to pass it. It's that the clerk of the committee be authorized to grant access to the committee's digital binder to the offices of the whips of each recognized party. Apparently, it will make the jobs of the whips a little easier. So if there's unanimous consent, great. If not, we can just wait the 48 hours. Okay. Anybody?
No.
Just looking to members.
No.
I hear no.
There's not unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker,
okay.
or Mr. Chair.
We do not have unanimous consent. Okay, so members, now I'd like to welcome our witnesses for the first hour. And in our first hour, we have from Climate Emergency Unit. He's the team lead, and we have Mr. Seth Klein with us for his opening remarks. Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon, honorable members. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share a new idea with you, a proposal for a new federal institution that I believe speaks to the challenges of fiscal federalism in the context of the climate crisis and the urgent need to transition our economy. I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, otherwise known as Vancouver. As noted, I am the team lead with the Climate Emergency Unit. I'm also the author of the book, A Good War, Mobilizing Canada for the Climate Emergency, which I believe most of you have received because prior to the last election, an enthusiastic reader from Kingston purchased and delivered a copy to every sitting MP. My book is structured around the lessons drawn from Canada's historic mobilization during the Second World War, an earlier existential threat, and applies those lessons to the climate emergency. Of course, that earlier mobilization in the face of fascism 80 years ago also had to navigate political differences, the challenges of Canadian Confederation, extraordinary financial challenges, and retool the economy, twice in fact, and an entire workforce needed to be recruited and trained up. Indeed, as challenging as the transition is that we now face to tackle the climate crisis, arguably the task we undertook then was greater. And the comparison is imperfect, of course, but I draw hope and inspiration from this historic reminder as we again face the need to retool our economy, as we again face a civilizational threat, and as the future of our children and grandchildren is once again profoundly put at risk. The World War II story provides a reminder of the extraordinary transformation we're capable of as we rise to this task of our lives. MP Daniel Blakey, as I understand, asked for me to be invited here today. And in particular, he wanted me to share an idea from the book that speaks to fiscal federalism at this historic moment. And that is the idea for a new federal transfer, which I call the Climate Emergency Just Transition Transfer. I provided the clerk with a short policy brief of the idea yesterday for distribution to you, but it probably still needs to be translated. I should say that the idea for this new transfer came out of a discussion with the president of the Alberta Federation of Labor, Gil McGowan, when I was interviewing him for my book. And he was rightly making the case that Confederation needs to recognize and appreciate that certain regions of Canada, notably the oil-producing provinces, have more heavy lifting to do when it comes to energy and economic transition in the face of the climate crisis. And what we believe is an innovative solution emerged from that discussion. So first of all, why do we need a new transfer? At the Climate Emergency Unit, we talk about the 6 markers of emergency, the key policy indicators that a government is genuinely in emergency mode. And the first 2 of those markers are 1, it spends what it takes to win, and 2, it creates new economic institutions to get the job done. And the third marker relevant to this topic is a commitment to leave no one behind. The problem is that while the federal government has started to take some meaningful climate action, it's not yet hitting those markers. We're still trying to incentivize our way to victory, and I fear it will not work. We are not on a path to bend our GHG emissions curve at the pace and the pitch required. We're not spending what it takes to win. We're not creating new transformative institutions to get this job done. And frustratingly, we have yet to make a compelling counteroffer to the thousands of people understandably anxious about what this transition means for their jobs and their livelihood. In the face of the climate emergency, Canada needs to make an audacious and hopeful offer to these workers and communities whose employment and economic security is currently tied to the fossil fuel industry, or to a lesser extent, the traditional auto industry or steel and concrete or agriculture, all of which face substantial transition challenges, and to Indigenous communities on the front lines of fossil fuel extraction. As many have argued, and as promised by the current federal government, we need a Just Transition Act. But we also need this act to be paired with and backed up by a substantial investment in the jobs of the future so that the promise of just transition isn't a hollow one. I believe a new federal climate emergency just transition transfer could be specifically linked to funding climate infrastructure projects that would create thousands of jobs, along with training and apprenticeships. Such a transfer could be a mechanism to renew Confederation while rising to the climate crisis. The transfer should mean that as we embark on this grand transformation, we would be able to say to thousands who currently work in the fossil fuel industry, none of you will be out of work. We need your help to meet this moment. Your skills and strength will be deployed building renewable energy projects, retrofitting buildings, building high-speed rail and public transit, renewing existing infrastructure to make it more resilient to extreme weather, managing our forests to reduce wildfire risks in the years to come. How should this be structured? So I believe the new transfer should be at least $25 billion a year, representing about 1% of Canada's GDP. It could and should fund much of the climate infrastructure needed in the coming years, but the transfer would speak to a climate confederation conundrum, which is that most of the climate infrastructure needed logically comes under provincial, municipal, or Indigenous jurisdiction, energy, transit, housing, but it's the federal government that has the greatest capacity to pay. But 2 features of the transfer would distinguish it from most other federal transfers. The first is that, unlike most transfers that allocate funding based on population, this transfer could distribute based on a formula linked to recent GHG emissions in each province, but fixed from that point forward so as not to perversely incentivize rising GHGs. Doing so would recognize that jurisdictions like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and Labrador face a more challenging task to transition their local economies. So, for example, Alberta currently produces 38% of Canada's GHG emissions, would receive 38% of the transfer money, quite a lot more than their share of the population. The second distinguishing feature is that rather than this transfer money being handed over to provincial governments, the funds would go to newly established just transition agencies, one in each province and territory, jointly governed by the federal government, provincial and territorial and local governments, vitally Indigenous nations from each province, with civil society reps also on the boards. It would ensure that the transfer money isn't simply absorbed into provincial budgets or used to displace other infrastructure or training funds. It would ensure the money is used for its intended purpose. There are already models of joint governance structures like this in Canada, like the port authorities. It may be that a separate transfer should be made directly to Indigenous communities, but the benefit of structuring the transfer around local agencies like this is that it provides assurance that the projects undertaken are sensitive to the realities and needs of each locale. Each province and jurisdiction has a different GHG profile and its own local labor market and training needs. This model would allow for those differences. There's a long list of worthwhile projects that a transfer like this could fund. The key is that the transfer would represent real dollars for actual transition and new jobs, not vague assurances and the historic false promise of just transition. An innovation like this could be a linchpin within an overall transition plan that is fair and just. Thanks. Happy to take your
Mr.
questions.
Klein, yep, thank you for your opening remarks. We are going to move now to members' questions. In this first round of questions, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions. We're starting with the Conservatives, and I have MP Lawrence for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's indeed a pleasure to be back here at Finance Committee and to be serving the people of Northumberland, Peterborough South once again. Mr. Klein, my first question will be, I haven't had the privilege of reading your book, but I would assume that in your theory that one of the actions that you would be for would be to ending further exploration of oil and gas across our country. Is that a fair characterization, or am I off?
It is a fair characterization.
That will have a substantial impact on our country. The financial impact of that will be huge. Beta Nor alone will have a financial impact estimated at $3.5 billion for revenues for the government. And you're calling upon the government to make a massive expenditure at a time when our deficit and debt are at record levels. I fail to see how that would be sustainable for Canada and for the government's finances.
So I hear your question, a couple questions. One is, how would we actually pay for this? And another is, what would it mean if we not, by the way, I don't envision an immediate turning off of the tap. I imagine a process of winding down an industry over a couple of decades. And we have to prepare for that, because if we, I just want to invite you to think about what we mean if we assume that demand for our product, whether it's oil or gas, is actually going to continue to expand. I feel it to be, in the end, a fairly cynical assumption, because only one of two things are possible. One possibility is that global demand for our product is going to continue to increase, and that will only be true if, as a world, we are going to blow past our Paris obligations and consign our children and grandchildren to a hellscape. The other possibility is that, and more likely, I would say, is that global demand is going to come steeply down. And if we don't prepare those workers and those communities for that eventuality with a transfer like this, we are consigning them to a great deal of tumult and disruption.
Thank you very much. My concern, though, is in the here and now, right? So if we look, for example, at Newfoundland Labrador, Beta Nor is expected to contribute, like I said, $3.5 billion. If we look to 2046, according to the PBO, their debt to GDP will be over 100%. And we're going to cut their revenue. And by the way, we're going to promote oil and gas that is a higher carbon of dictator oil. And so by shutting that off, we're going to be, one, reducing the amount of revenue that our country is spending, and then you're calling for a massive amount of expenditure. Like there isn't an endless amount of money. At the end of the day, all the money comes from the same place as the people of Canada. And I just fail to see how your idea of spending these billions and billions of dollars while kneecapping our revenue is at all sustainable.
Well, you mentioned off the top that you hadn't read my book. I invite you to, because I think, like me, you would find some inspiration there. The task of what we did there in terms of both expenditures and the retooling of the economy and the retraining of our workforce, what we are up against now actually pales in comparison. And what we did then actually presaged a couple of decades of the strongest economic performance in Canadian history. I would also say that what I'm talking about now actually pales in comparison to what we did in that first year of the pandemic, not that long ago. So one of the, you're asking how are we going to pay for this? I think we would pay for this through some combination of tax increases on windfall profits and wealth, but also a role for the Bank of Canada. In that first year of the pandemic, the Bank of Canada was buying up federal government securities to finance the emergency response to the tune of about $5 billion a week.
I apologize, but my time is short, and I do not mean to be rude, but I have to jump into that. We've seen what the printing of money has done. We've put in place the largest tax increase Canadians have ever seen, called the inflation tax. We are now seeing food going up at 10%. Printing more money is simply just not the answer. But my time is running short. Could you say whether you're in favor of the Bay du Nord project or not?
I'm categorically against it, and we're going to have to disagree on monetary policy because I don't think that's the main source of inflation.
Okay. Well, that would be against every single monetary crisis that has ever occurred. Every time inflation has occurred from the Weimar Republic, it has been the responsibility of two things. One, of printing money, and poor government management, and we've seen both of that here. And your idea of just spending money endlessly, money comes from somewhere. It comes from the production of goods and services. We can't just simply create that. How we create wealth in this country is not just printing money. My goodness, it is by creating more goods and services, by letting the power of the free market reign. And your idea that we can just continue to go to the taxpayer and take billions and billions and billions of dollars is not sustainable, in my opinion, is not the way to fight the very real challenge of climate change.
Well, let me offer the observation. First of all, we share a concern about rising food costs. And if climate change continues, that is going to continue to drive increase food costs. Most economists don't believe that this is a supply side origin inflation, a demand side, but rather it's a supply side origin inflation. And one of the drivers is increased energy costs and record oil and gas profits. So why not tax that and put it to work?
Time. Thank you, MP Lawrence and Mr. Klein. Now we're moving to the Liberals and MP Zerowitz for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to say it's great to be back and it's nice to see everyone. Mr. Klein, I just want to say a huge thanks to you for being here today. And I really appreciate your creative ideas. I think we're going to need all of them in order for us to be able to achieve our Paris Accord targets to get to net zero by 2050. I feel an extraordinary urgency to act around climate change. I can absolutely tell you that in my riding of Davenport, the clear message that comes from them is they're absolutely worried about inflation, they're worried about the geopolitical crisis around the world, but their very clear direction to me is do not slow down on tackling emissions, on reducing emissions, on moving as quickly and as urgently towards achieving our Paris Accord targets, as well as moving towards net zero. So in the context of that, I want to say again, thanks to you and thanks for your book. I have not had a chance to read it, but I have read some articles on it. My first question to you is there a country that maybe serves as a model for the type of climate transfer and agency that you're looking to create?
First of all, thank you for your comments and your words, and I share your urgency. I don't see another whole country hitting the 6 markers of emergency that I describe, although at the municipal level there are places that are. But there are certainly countries, even within the G7, who are doing substantially better than we are. And I would note the 2 G7 countries that have made the most progress on reducing emissions are the UK and Germany, much of that under conservative governments, I would say, conservative governments who haven't made climate into the wedge issue it too often is made here. In the case of the UK, which is the best performer when it comes to lowering emissions, a big piece of that relevant to the work of your committee is the introduction of carbon budgets. Going back some years now, where they have rolling 5-year carbon budgets that decline over time, an independent oversight committee that ensures that the whole mechanics of government are meeting that goal. I mean, think about the work that your committee does now on the fiscal front. Your committee tours the country and solicits input. You meet with provincial governments. We have an auditor general who makes sure we spend well. We have a treasury board that makes sure governments stay within their budgets. We have a parliamentary budget officer who tries to inform all of this with the best evidence-based projections. That's what we need for climate too, in order to vigorously drive down those emissions.
Part of your proposal in terms of the just transition transfer is that the money would be fed down to the province, and there would be an agency that's created, and it would work with the province to actually make sure that the dollars are spent the way it's supposed to be spent. And I guess my question to you is, there is leadership across this country, provincial leadership across this country, that don't fully believe in the urgency of climate action. So how do we set up the joint body that would actually produce results? And I'll actually provide maybe a little bit of an idea as well. In the United States, President Biden, in delivering infrastructure dollars, has very much tied it to sustainability and to reducing emissions. And I wonder whether your proposal might incorporate something similar such as that. Your thoughts?
That's a really good question too. So first of all, I would say, so I'm getting a bit of an echo on my mic. When we think about those provincial or territorial just transition agencies, I mean, it would be up to the federal government to figure out how to structure it in the end. But one piece of it could be that the provincial governments would be asked to match an ante-in. And where they weren't prepared to do that, you would proceed working with Indigenous communities and municipalities, as in some ways as you already do with some transit projects. You could also approach this the same way the federal government did with the childcare deals. You know, you move forward with the transfer one province at a time with those that are ready to move forward with you, and eventually everyone comes along. I don't want to underplay that this is hard to find agreement, but forgive me because of the nature of my research that I often sound like everyone's weird uncle and go back to the war. In the war, Prime Minister Mackenzie King also dealt with a lot of premiers who often disagreed with him and many of whom strongly disliked him. And yet something remarkable happened in the nature of cooperation from across the board and across the political spectrum, because that's what ultimately happens when people come to terms with the reality of an emergency.
My last question, and it's a quick one. We are already increasing in the tune of billions in terms of training and retraining to the provinces. Do you not think that that is being adequately targeted? That's one. And then two, in the last election, we promised $2 billion in a futures fund for Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland to support local and regional economic diversification. Do you think that such a transfer could also be used to help retrain workers?
I definitely think training and apprenticeship should be a part of it, although I think the bulk of it should actually be in investments in infrastructure itself, because more than training and apprenticeship support, what workers want to see is the actual jobs. In reference to the 2 points that you made, first of all, the future fund promise of the $3 billion for Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland is certainly welcome, but I would say it's not nearly enough. As I've laid out, and also that while it's true that Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland and Labrador need the most support, including for the reasons that the first MP raised, everyone faces transition challenges. We need money for this to go to every province, but in the formula that I'm proposing, a disproportionate share of the money would go to those provinces that face the highest transition challenges, namely those provinces. On the existing training, I think we should disagree because they...
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Yeah. Okay, and now we are moving to the bloc, and Monsieur Samari.
Thank you very much, Chair. First, greetings to all my colleagues. It's a pleasure to see you all. And it is our first committee meeting this fall, and I would like to thank all of the staff that enables this committee to function, including our much adored interpreters, but our clerks, our group of analysts, and all of you. It really is a pleasure to see you again, and thanks for all you do. Let me begin with you, Mr. Klein, and I apologize. A point of order. I've just checked with my colleagues, and I think we could agree that next Monday's meeting be a subcommittee to discuss the future plans for forthcoming meetings. Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie.
Also, I saw a hand go up. MP Blakey.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very happy to do that. I think it makes sense to try and initiate a formal conversation about community business as soon as possible. Also wondering about the Wednesday, because if we are going to have a study day, I'm sure the clerk might appreciate some idea. I know that the inflation study is a standing study here. There's been some recent discussion in media around grocery prices, and I think some good articles. So I might throw into the proposition, if it doesn't delay us too much, the idea that we could take up a study of food prices on the Wednesday under the auspices of the standing inflation study.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. And Mr. Klein, you might feel that this is like the first day of school here for all of us. We're seeing all each other again. And we do want to thank the clerk and the analysts and the interpreters and everybody here that does just a tremendous job. And as Monsieur Sainte-Marie and Mr. Blakey, and I see Mr. Albus' hand up now on the screen, and I will bring in Mr. Albus, but they puts forward a proposal. But what I want to say is, because we've worked so well as a committee, it does help in terms of, I'm sure, with the work that the clerk and others need to do when it comes to getting witnesses. It's not easy, especially when it comes down to last minute. So thank you, gentlemen, for that. And I'm now going to hear from MP Albus from the West Coast.
Great. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, colleagues. I'll be very brief in this. I just want to congratulate MP Blakey for trying to swing in the direction of next Wednesday to his cause. I just would remind everyone that we do have private members' business, and those members will probably be available for Wednesday, and probably the bureaucrats that I'm sure will want to have their view on those bills. But I do want to support my colleague from Quebec's suggestion on a business meeting. I don't want to leave it where it's just you alone, Mr. Chair, having to make these lonely decisions.
Thank you, MP Albus. Never feel lonely. It's great. Like I said, we are a team, and we want to set our path, and that's what we will be doing. But it's good to hear all the suggestions. I do see another hand up, MP Beach.
Well, I would also be equally as quick. So a subcommittee sounds great. It would be great. I think we had discussions last session about inflation, and specifically, I think all of us talked at one point about groceries in. I'm sure we'll talk about private members' business in the associated subcommittee meeting, but based on what you just said about getting witnesses in, very happy to support getting groceries on the table and talking a little bit more about inflation.
Okay, thank you, MP Beach. So I'm looking to see if do we have consensus on this in terms of the Monday and the Wednesday from members? I just want to see kind of where everybody's at. I think we do have some planning to do. Of course, we've got PBC and many other things coming before us, and as well as we do have still a day left on that inflation study, and I know groceries and a lot of discussion has been around inflation. So, members, okay, all right. So now we're going to move back to Mr. Klein.
Chair?
Yes, sorry, MP Albus. Yeah, I saw your hand go up now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to comment that there is one witness on the inflation study that we have not heard yet. So maybe you may wish to inquire with the Honorable Chrystia Freeland. She was requested to attend that for 3 hours. Wednesday, I'm ready to meet up next week. It'd be great if you were to check with her as well.
Okay, thank you for that, MP Albus. I'll pass that on through the PS, MP Beach. Yeah, okay, great. And now to Mr. Klein. So, Mr. Klein, you're back on. I did stop the time, so it's now to MP Sainte-Marie for 6 minutes.
Thank you. I apologize for that, and I'm pleased to hear that a Minister of Finance will come next Wednesday and answer all our questions, if she's available, of course. So, Mr. Klein, I do apologize once again that we got off the topic that you're here to discuss today, but I'm very pleased that you were able to come and testify on such an important subject. Now, to understand your proposal, I understand that this climate change is happening and we have to do so much more to make a difference. And you've come with a very interesting proposition. This idea of yours for a new transfer would not be based on population. It would not be prorated to population. Rather, the transfers would be to provinces based on the job that needs to get done. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, sorry, I cut you off.
Well, I was just to elaborate, I want to acknowledge that in such a scenario as I've proposed, where the funding is linked to greenhouse gas emissions, your province and my province would get less than our share of the population. And that's the nature of this, in recognition of where the greatest challenges face. Both because of the GHG profiles in this place, there's another element as well, which is part of why your province and my province, and to a lesser extent, MP Daniel Blakey's province, tend to have lower greenhouse gas emissions per capita, has to do with the dumb luck of our geography and where we got mountains and rivers. And that's been a big help to us. And so the formula in some ways recognizes that too.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's entirely logical. Now, for example, if we take the Western provinces that right now depend a lot on hydrocarbons, you're suggesting that to meet the challenges of climate change, that production cease and it be replaced by a different economic activity. And now, if I've understood what you've said, it would be up to the provincial government to decide what kinds of projects. Now, could you please repeat here and explain what kind of economic diversification could unfold in those provinces? What kind of other economic activities could unfold?
Merci. So first of all, just to clarify, I'm not saying that oil and gas activity would cease. I'm saying it would phase out over a couple of decades. And I also want to clarify that I'm not saying that the work of the transfer agencies would be governed by the provincial government in each of those places. I'm saying it would be governed by a joint governance body that includes the federal government, the provincial government, municipal governments, indigenous governments, and so on. But mostly that those local governance groups could determine an investment package that speaks to the reality of the GHG profiles in that province and the labor market realities in that province. So in Alberta and Saskatchewan, it's obviously going to focus in particular around transition from oil and gas. In Ontario, it may be investments in retooling auto lines to get them fully electrified. In other places, it may be about driving the transformation of the agricultural sector. It depends what the realities are, but you would want to have a body that is making investments that are aligned with the fastest, most ambitious path to drive down emissions in that province.
Okay, merci.
All right. Thank you. That's so interesting. What are your personal opinions concerning the small nuclear module reactors that could also reduce GHG and carbon capture. Would those be the kinds of projects that could be funded under this kind of transfer?
A very good, important question. To become your strange uncle again, in the war, Mackenzie King famously had this line when in the conscription referendum of conscription if necessary, but not necessarily conscription. That's kind of how I feel about nuclear. Nuclear if necessary, but not necessarily nuclear. I will make the observation. There is, because people. We've seen a fixation, I think, on tech solutions like small nuclear, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen. There's a small role to be played by hydrogen and carbon capture and storage in sectors that cannot be easily electrified. There is this odd tendency, too often on display these days, to fixate on these unproven technologies when the non-sexy yet cheaper and effective solutions are already there sitting on the shelf waiting for us to invest in them big time. I'm talking about solar and wind and geothermal. We know how to do these things. And the next few years is all about speed and scale. And these
Klein,
alternatives lend themselves to that.
Mr. Klein, I need to interrupt you, unfortunately, because my time is out. Thank you for the answers. And, Mr. Chair, on my next turn, I would like to give my turn to my friend Elizabeth May, who has questions for Mr. Klein. Thank you.
Marie? No, in the next turn. Yeah, yes. Okay, yeah, we are moving to the NDP and MP Blakey for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. As colleagues have mentioned already, it's nice to see everybody, and a big thank you to the staff who've reassembled here, and thank you to Mr. Klein for appearing today and getting grilled by the committee for an hour, which I'm sure is a peculiar kind of pleasure. I wanted to come back to some of the discussion around the economy that Mr. Lawrence had started. He said that, wealth is generated by real production and production of real things in the economy, which I would agree with. I think he might find some disagreement, particularly by proponents of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency who are big on value that is not rooted in the real economy or real production, but purely speculative. So he may want to check in if he knows anyone who's big on that, how they feel about his statement. But of course, the other thing that is critical to the economy is demand. And you've talked already about some of the progress that other G7 countries have made in reducing their emissions. And they're projecting further emissions, which means a reduction in demand over time with the folks that we hear some in the House say we should be selling our oil and gas too, particularly in this time. And I wonder if you want to speak a little bit to what it means for Canada in this moment to be structuring its economy to meet what may be transitory demand and ultimately going where our allies are moving away from, and the kinds of real production and value that Canada can use to produce wealth for all of us by going where the puck is heading in terms of the global energy economy.
Well, that's a great metaphor. And that's exactly right. I think we have to offer real hope, not false hope. People understandably are feeling anxious if their current livelihoods are tied to these industries. And it is a source of frustration to me and related to my presentation that the federal government has yet to make that compelling counteroffer to those folks. But we must. Global demand for oil and gas has to steeply drop off in the next few years. It must. And if it doesn't, our grandkids and children are fried. So we should dearly hope that it will. But if it is, we have to offer some hope to those people who are currently employed there that they're not going to be left behind. And if we simply let the market determine that demand without preparation, we are consigning them, as I said earlier, to a great deal of upheaval and disruption.
What's happening in the United States right now, I mean, I think there is a certain amount of demand that is changing as individuals in the market make their own choices. But we are seeing a very intentional, structured change in the market down south under the Biden administration. What does it mean for Canada not to be making similar kinds of investments? And what does it mean to allow the U.S. for the foreseeable future to begin restructuring its own economy and its own supply chains towards a lower emission economy, and not have Canada show up at the table or mobilize businesses and workers in order to participate in that restructuring? What does that mean for the future of Canada's economy?
Well, it would mean trouble. I do think they are now on the cusp of moving quite a lot faster than us. In fairness, I don't want to say that the federal government is doing nothing, but I would highlight a difference in approach in what we're seeing from the Biden administration and what we've seen in our own. The flagship policy that we currently have remains the carbon price. I'm in favor of carbon pricing, to be clear, but it's not the end all and be all. And the approach that Canada has taken to tackling this crisis is to try to incentivize our way to victory. We send price signals, we offer rebates, we encourage and cajole. What we don't do is require, and what we aren't doing is spending what it takes to win at the scale required. And we're not creating brash new institutions like this transfer or new crown enterprises that would mass produce electric heat pumps or electric buses or what have you. In contrast, you're seeing the Biden administration start to spend what it takes to win by an order of magnitude more than us, directly investing in wind and electric and so on.
Before my time's elapsed, I wanted to ask, one of the things that's come up recently is the federal government has not yet acted on the kind of, let's say, metrics that were required in their kind of signature climate legislation to date, their Sustainability Act. I'm wondering how a new federal transfer might be able to motivate better metrics, better reporting, better accountability at all levels of government in order to ensure that Canada meets the moment in respect to the climate crisis.
Well, what I'm proposing with the transfer is only one piece of what has to be part of a package. It's not the end all and be all. I actually think the carbon budgeting idea that I offered in answer to a previous question is another important means by which of achieving that accountability. The transfer is simply about making sure that we spend what it takes to win and that money gets where it needs to go. So much of the federal government spending right now on climate infrastructure is tied up in the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which just adds years and complication to the process instead of the kind of fleet of foot spending that we saw, for example, All Parties Unite behind in the first year of the pandemic. The federal government is spending on climate, but they're not spending what it takes to win. It's sometimes hard to get at these numbers. My former colleagues at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives have done a good job with this. And if you generously tally up all of the funding that we've had to date and annualize it, it comes in generously at about $12 billion a year. Now, that sounds like a lot of money. It's about 0.4% of GDP. Sir Nicholas Stern has proposed that governments spend about 2% of GDP on the climate emergency, which in Canada's case would be about $56 billion a year. So we're not spending a little less than we should. We're spending less by about a 4 to 5-fold order of magnitude.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Klein. Thank you, MP Blakey. Members, just looking at the time, we are moving into our second round of questions. We don't have enough time for a full round. So we'll do as we've done in the past. We'll break it up by party and evenly. So it'll be about 3.5 minutes for each party or so. And we'll start with the Conservatives. And I've got MP Albus for approximately 3.5 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Klein, for coming in today. Fiscal federalism is usually defined by understanding which functions and instruments are best centralized and which are best placed in the sphere of decentralized levels of government. I take from your book and from your presence and discussion here today, you are more on the centralizing side when it comes to transfers and to climate. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily. I actually think a lot of the key tools that for what we need to do are in provincial hands and to a lesser extent municipal hands. And that's the point of the transfer. Most of the climate infrastructure we need, those assets, will actually be in provincial or municipal hands. But it's the federal government that has the greatest capacity to pay. And I'm trying to figure out how to crack that nut with a transfer idea like this.
Do you believe the federal government is cooperating, consulting, working with, hand in glove towards a Canadian response to climate change?
I see signs of that, yes, but not at the level required. We often, this is my point about the incentivizing approach that we've taken. We're doing things without wanting to spend what it takes to win, and a lot of those provincial and municipal and Indigenous governments need to see the money in order to do what we need them to do.
So let's just switching gears. We're both from British Columbia, so it's always great to hear from someone from British Columbia. The European Commission has said that natural gas, they've said it's a transitional fuel. In the United States, according to the Energy Information Administration, they've been able to pull about 100 gigawatts of energy away from coal by displacing it with natural gas. Are you a supporter of natural gas?
I'm not. First of all, let me acknowledge that you are from a riding that knows the climate emergency, and I've heard you speak well on the fact that we need this federal money for climate adaptation infrastructure, and your riding needs it as much as anyone's. There was a time, maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when one could have made a reasonable case for natural gas as a bridge fuel, but the bridge was to now. We ran out the clock. And that is why organizations like the International Energy Agency and the Secretary General of the United Nations keep saying that there is no longer any room for any new fossil fuel infrastructure, and they include gas in that.
Okay, well, I do believe that if we look what's happening in Germany right now, and if a country as advanced as Germany is not able to transition towards those other things to be able to allow their population to keep themselves warm and to fuel their industry, I think it's going to be very difficult to not utilize things like natural gas. But we can agree to disagree. Thank you for your presence here today. I'm just going to ask the rest of my time go to my colleague Scott Davidson so he can ask some Ontario-based questions.
Okay, well, a bridge fuel, I guess I'll just make a comment, and thank you, Steph. You know, I represent the soup and salad bowl of Canada, which is the Holland Marsh, and I can tell you right now, this is how behind Canada is. I still have half my farmers burning propane. We can't even get the infrastructure in for the bridge fuel being natural gas. We can't even get people passports or get our airports organized. And, you know, to talk about training thousands of workers and more government agencies and this, that, and the other thing, you know, we are behind the curve right now. And I have more Okay, Peter. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
well, I would just say for those,
and we're moving, Mr. Klein. We're moving to the Liberals. I've got MP Baker for 3.5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Klein. Thank you very much for being with us here today. I found this discussion very, very interesting, and I wanted to. One of the things that you spoke about in your exchange with one of my colleagues early on in this hearing was you spoke about the price on pollution. That you said it multiple times today that you support that concept. Can you just explain? And I'm not just thinking about the members in this room, but for my constituents and others who might be watching this at home, like why is the price on pollution an important mechanism that works in your view?
Well, I think there's a basic principle at stake, which is that we shouldn't be able to use our shared atmosphere as a free garbage dump, and that pollution we should be paid for. I think it does send a signal for certain, both at the household level and at the industry level, about how people might want to shift. And importantly, I think it's a source of revenue for what we actually need to do. But I don't put as much stock in it as some people do, because I am trying to approach this crisis with a new framework pulled from that wartime story. Imagine if we had mobilized in the face of fascism by trying to encourage, by sending price signals, by offering people rebates. It would have been a different outcome. And people looking backwards would have shaken their heads. it's not how you prosecute a fight like this.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess I'm just wondering whether I'm going back to the price and pollution, because I really think it's important we leverage your expertise on this particular topic, and I'm not dismissing what you've been saying about the other element of it. I just want to make sure that we benefit from your knowledge and thoughts on specifically on the price and pollution, and so that's why I'm coming back to this again. Like again, what is, for those of my constituents in Etobicoke Centre watching, or Canadians who are watching, what does the price and pollution do, and why does it help fight the climate crisis?
Well, it is a tool that's helpful because as the price of gas and natural gas in our homes or fuel increases, it may signal, particularly when people are facing the point of both industry and consumers change, a capital change of their vehicle or their furnace or whatever, that pricing factors into it. But again, I don't think we should overstate it. The main thing I want to say to all of you across parties is the climate emergency demands that we move forward. We cannot keep re-prosecuting old fights. We urgently need to move forward with every tool in the toolbox. And I'm proposing tools that are different from carbon pricing because those incentivizing approaches aren't going to do what we need to do.
Okay, I hear you. I have about 30 seconds left, I believe. I have a constituent who, Mr. Green, who on many occasions has spoken to me about geothermal energy. I know we don't have a lot of time. I know you don't want to focus on technological solutions, but for the sake of my constituent, an advocate to fight the climate crisis, Mr. Green, what would you say about the role that geothermal can play in our fight against the climate crisis?
It absolutely
Very
plays
short
an
answer,
important role.
please.
Absolutely plays an important role. There you go. Nice and short.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, MP Baker. We are moving over to the block. I know MP Samari has offered his time up to MP May. MP May for 3+ minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Gabrielle. And hello, Seth. I have read your book multiple times. I think we have an interesting moment here because many of my colleagues, and they are all friends at this table, think that the climate crisis can be resolved through measures that are incremental and inadequate. We have recent science, even as recent as last week, that the tipping points are closer and more dangerous. So I wanted to ask you to reflect on a wonderful quote in your book from C.D. Howe. When asked, this is costing too much, how much can we afford to spend on this war? And he said, correct me if I have a quote wrong, if we don't win the war, nothing else matters. You referred moments ago to the hellscape our children would experience. Can you perhaps try to inject into this discussion at this committee table the risks of not acting with appropriate urgency and with appropriate resources?
Yeah, well, it's one of my favorite quotes too from C.D. Howe, who was, of course, an icon in the Liberal Party government during the Second World War, that if we lose the war, nothing will matter. And that is certainly true of the climate crisis. If we do not do what we have to do, the conversations about what seems reasonable and how much can we actually do this, our grandkids are going to shake their heads and wonder what we were thinking. The point I was also making or trying to make in response to Mr. Albus is that if we fail to do this, the cost of the devastation that's coming will far surpass the cost that we're talking about now. And the Fraser Valley in the wake of the atmospheric rivers last November know that full well. I guess what I'm inviting all of you to consider out of that story in the book is the kind of cross-partisan unity that occurred. And I would say this even to the Conservatives on this panel. The Conservatives were also in opposition during the war, and they critiqued rightly the government. But mostly they critiqued the government for failing to prosecute the fight enough. And I think that's what we're going to need today.
And quickly, on the question of just transition, former Environment Minister Catherine McKenna commissioned a panel chaired by Lois Corbett of New Brunswick and Hassan Youssef, who now sits in the other place. And they actually went into all of the communities where people are dependent on coal mining. And I feel as though those communities must be so enraged because they shared what they felt they would need as individual workers and as communities if and when coal was shut down. I want to, with remaining 40 seconds, how duped were those communities that the Liberals have done nothing to provide a just transition after all that advice was provided?
Well, so in the case of Alberta, we saw some support for the coal transition, not enough, and of course, far more went to the coal companies than it went to communities and workers. And this is what I'm trying to get at. There's stuff that's happening, but we need that hopeful and compelling alternative, that counteroffer, and that's what I hope people will see in the proposal that I'm making to you. That, you know, honorable members, this is the make it or break it decade for us and our kids. That, again, another civilizational threat is on our doorstep. And you are all elected at an historic time. And a couple of decades from now, when you find yourselves in conversations with your kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews about your time in office, and they're going to be curious, and you'll all no doubt have things to point to, accomplishments that you feel some pride in. And then they will realize that you were elected into leadership in the first half of this decade, and they're going to want to know what we did on this file. And I guess I'm saying your role in bringing this about with the transition transfer like this is something you could point to.
Okay. Thank you, MP May and Mr. Klein. We are going to our last questioner for this panel, and we thank you, Mr. Klein, for taking so many questions. And that is MP Blakey from the NDP.
Well, thank you very much. You touched on this a little bit in your exchange with Ms. May, but I thought it might be helpful for you to come back to the cost of inaction, and I mean specifically financial costs, because we often talk as if investing in climate solutions is compared to a status quo that doesn't involve extraordinary costs. And so I wonder if you can just kind of paint a brief picture of what it means to not meet this moment and to not spend what we need to spend in order to win. What are the costs that are coming down the line for us? We've seen some already, whether that is, you know, measured in the amount of money that has had to be spent in the case of wildfires, or in lost economic opportunity when the Port of Vancouver was shut down for an extended period of time, for instance. I wonder if you could just put a little bit more context around that for the committee.
Yeah. I don't have all of the costs at my fingertips, I should say, but they're huge. I mean, just to give you one example, the atmospheric river that happened event last November here in this province had a total public and private costs in the billions, that one event. And then there are the costs. So there's mountains of evidence and research out there to get at your question. I want to close by emphasizing the human costs. The other thing that happened to my province a year ago, June, was 600 people died in the space of a week in the heat dome, the most deadly weather event in Canadian history. And not to get obscene about this, but they cooked in their homes. And a few weeks ago, we saw flooding in Pakistan, where a population virtually the same size, the same population of the whole of Canada, has been displaced from their homes. This is only going to get worse. We are on a path where if we do not get serious about this, it is catastrophic and deadly for hundreds of thousands. It is deeply disruptive for everybody else. And as the Secretary General warned everyone 2 days ago, it is quite possibly ungovernable. If we lose this war, nothing else matters.
Thank you very much.
MP Blakey, and on behalf of the committee, we want to thank you, Mr. Klein, for answering so many questions. We really appreciate your testimony. Will help inform this report on fiscal federalism. Thank you. And on that, members, we are going to suspend for a minute or two to bring on our second panel. Second panel on this discussion on the current state of fiscal federalism in Canada. And before us, we have the Canadian Health Coalition. We have the National Director of Policy and Advocacy, Stephen Staples. We've got an economist from the Canadian Health Coalition, Keith Newman. From the Canadian Union of Public Employees, we have the Senior Economist of National Services, Angela McEwen. And from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we have Mr. Jay Goldberg, who's the director here in Ontario. We'll start with the Canadian Health Coalition for opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Chairperson and members of the Common Standing Committee on Finance. My name is Stephen Staples. I am the National Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Canadian Health Coalition. And I'm soon to be joined by my colleague and board member and economist, Keith Newman. The Canadian Health Coalition was founded in 1979 to defend and expand public Medicare in Canada. We're comprised of frontline healthcare workers, unions, community groups, and experts. I'm delighted to speak to you on the topic of current state of fiscal federalism in Canada. The aspect that we would like to address today is public healthcare spending. Today, we would like to make three recommendations to the government through this committee. First, that the federal government must oppose increased reliance upon for-profit delivery of healthcare services. Second, that the federal government should increase its funding to provinces and territories while ensuring accountability and outcomes for healthcare dollars. And third, that the federal government should deliver on its long-promised healthcare programs, especially a national universal pharmacare program. Let's take these step by step. The Canadian Health Coalition is very concerned by statements and actions made by some premiers that they intend to devote more public dollars to private for-profit healthcare providers. And while these measures are occurring within their respective jurisdictions, the federal government is not a bystander. The government must state its opposition to this for-profit direction clearly and strongly, and take action using the tools at its disposals to defend public Medicare. This starts by increasing enforcement of the Canada Health Act's principles and conditions which govern funding to the provinces through the Canada Health Transfer, or CHT. The impasse between the federal government and the provinces and territories over funding formulas is preventing urgently needed action to address the crisis faced by patients and families and healthcare workers. And we support the call for more funding for healthcare by all levels of government. The federal government should increase its funding to provinces and territories. At the same time, federal dollars should not come without strings, and we expect accountability from the provinces and territories for healthcare dollars. Premiers should not use federal healthcare dollars for non-healthcare spending, for instance, such as tax cuts or rebates. And certainly they should not decrease their healthcare spending after receiving more federal dollars. Third, along with increased funding through the CHT, the federal government must work with provinces to ensure improved outcomes for people in Canada. And this can be accomplished by establishing new, long-promised universal programs such as pharmacare. Pharmacare in particular will create savings through reduced drug costs, which now account for as much healthcare spending as doctors. Even more, public universal pharmacare will reduce the strain on our system. Full prescriptions mean empty emergency rooms. Finally, we would like to suggest that the path through this crisis can be found in commitments made by the government in its accord with the NDP. The Confidence and Supply Agreement, or the CASA, as we call it, has 4 important healthcare commitments: public dental care, universal pharmacare, healthcare investments, and safe long-term care. Most, if not all of these, will require cooperation between the federal and provincial governments. Negotiated alongside a commitment for increased CHT funding, which the provinces have been requesting, we can see the potential for a grand bargain on healthcare. The federal government provides more healthcare funding. In exchange, provinces and territories cooperate on new programs such as pharmacare. And parts of this bargain must include a focus on building our public healthcare system, not increasing the corrosive effects of for-profit delivery. So thank you for inviting the Canadian Health Coalition to present today, and we look forward to your questions.
Staples for your opening remarks. Now we'll hear from the Canadian Union of Public Employees and Ms. McEwen for up to around 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. The Canadian Union of Public Employees is Canada's largest union. It has over 700,000 members. Keeping members take great pride in delivering quality services in communities across Canada as they work in a broad cross-section of the economy, including healthcare, education, municipalities, libraries, universities, colleges, social services, public utilities, emergency services, transportation, and airlines. And for all of our members, the pandemic has brought forward many underfunded, inadequate, and altogether missing systems to the forefront. And now these workers need action. From our broken long-term care system that still allows for-profit operators and poor working conditions, to the inadequate employment insurance systems, we need substantial change to better serve workers and the services that we all rely on. New programs such as the child care agreements, a national pharmacare program, or a just transition require significant federal leadership and funding in order to be successful. I recognize that borrowing in the current environment would be considered inflationary by the Bank of Canada and so lead to further hiking interest rates. However, the federal government has cut taxes for corporations and the wealthy over the past 20 years, which means that we have significant room to increase these taxes. The tax rate for large profitable corporations was cut from 27% in the year 2000 down to 15% in 2007. The capital gains inclusion rate was cut from 75% to 50%. And just for the information of members and those watching, capital gains is income from selling an investment asset like real estate other than your primary residence or stocks. And it's treated differently than employment income. So this is one way that our tax system privileges wealth over income. And the inclusion rate used to calculate what portion of the profit is considered income for tax purposes. Research shows us that about 90% of the benefit from this goes to the top 10% of income earners. Stephen Harper also made steep cuts to the federal government's fiscal capacity, cutting the GST by 2 percentage points before the 2008 recession. Altogether, these cuts under Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, and Stephen Harper resulted in the federal government's revenue falling from 18% of GDP in the year 2000 to 14% in 2010. Under the current government, this percentage has risen slightly to 15%. So just for reference, 1% of GDP is around $24 billion. So that is, in current dollars, a significant amount of money. This left a huge hole in the federal budget and has had a ripple effect across provincial budgets. When Stephen Harper cut the GST, he suggested that provinces could easily recover the lost revenue by raising provincial sales taxes. But provincial governments have faced backlash at the ballot box when they've attempted to do so, and they've only managed to maintain the status quo on revenue as a share of GDP. It's much easier for the federal government to raise revenue than it is for provincial governments, who face larger competition, real competition in terms of tax prices with their neighbors. So the result is that provincial governments have picked up larger and larger share of total government spending in Canada, with no additional revenue sources to fund the critical services they provide. Restoring federal revenues to 2000 levels would mean at least an extra $50 billion a year to fund expanded public services. And we recognize that with this additional funding, it's essential that there would be strong conditions to ensure that it is additional financing and not merely replacing what provinces are already spending. This is especially true in healthcare, which is under threat of further privatization. We need strong national standards on how provinces and territories are allowed to spend these funds. QP wants to ensure that provinces and territories are prevented from using Canada Health Transfer funds on privatized health services, including for-profit medical facilities and for-profit care delivered through virtual healthcare systems. Finally, municipalities own or control about 60% of Canada's core infrastructure, and they should have the funding and authority to manage it and maintain it publicly. The federal government could play an important role in this by scrapping the mandate, the current privatization mandate of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. The bank would better fill its purpose and the public if it prioritized direct financing to help local governments build public infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McEwen. And now we're going to hear from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and we have Mr. Goldberg up for 5 minutes, please.
Good evening. The pandemic has renewed calls for major changes to Canadian fiscal federalism on pretty well all sides. The motion currently under consideration definitely calls for a reform of current challenges. But I do think it's important to look back historically and recognize that Canadian fiscal federalism is incredibly far from where the system was designed to be almost 150 years ago. The trend in recent years has been the federal government to increase transfers to the provinces to face growing healthcare system issues. The problem here is that it obscures accountability, and it allows the level of government with the greatest revenue, in this case in Ottawa, exerting control over choices provincial political policymakers can make. In a paper that was written that I did when I was in the PhD program at the University of Toronto, we spoke of the dangers of what we called entanglement. And this is the idea that one level of government has the taxation power to fund programs that are the constitutional responsibilities of another level of government. And by having different levels of government fund and then operate social programs, Canadians are in many ways losing out on the ability to hold the appropriate level of government accountable for failures within the system when they do occur. We have known about funding problems within the framework of the Canadian fiscal federalism for decades. The Royal-Sirois Commission, which made recommendations on the state of fiscal federalism in 1940, noted there was a significant imbalance between the revenue-generating capacity and spending responsibilities between the federal and provincial levels of government. And I think we can consider the fact that in 1937, and this is when the commission was created, the federal government generated revenues amounting to double that of all the provincial governments combined. The Royal-Sirois Commission made some sweeping recommendations for reform. Most of them were never actually adopted. And what we've ended up with is a complex web of transfer payments from the federal government to the provinces. But Canadian fiscal federalism in many ways is broken, and at a time of Canada's founding, The provinces that were given responsibility over issues like healthcare and education, these were seen as more minor issues at the time. These costs have ballooned, and that's led to ballooning spending at the provincial levels, as many as mentioned, but ultimately that taxation power is still in Ottawa. To fund these programs effectively, but also allow for greater responsibility, the federal government should look at transferring taxation points to provincial governments so that they can raise the revenue, spend it, and then be accountable for how that money is being spent to the voters. The status quo on equalization is also in need of reform. We have taxpayers from some provinces that have ended up sending money to other provinces with little return. Again, the issue is accountability. Provinces that receive equalization funding don't have the adequate incentive to strive for improvement. The program is unfair to many provinces, and it's not just a question of Alberta. We've noticed, for example, Newfoundland and Labrador has been considered a have province, but at the same time has received a $5.2 billion backdoor bailout from the federal government. This is a program as well that has discouraged resource development in provinces other than those provinces that have used that revenue that has then been transferred to other provinces as part of the equalization formula. Ultimately, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which has been around for more than 30 years now, believes that accountability is one of the most important things you can have in government. If we are going to have government deliver important healthcare, education, or other services, it ought to be the case that voters, when they go to the ballot box, are able to hold politicians accountable for whether or not they've delivered on their priorities, whether it's healthcare, whether you're talking about long-term care, or other areas. Obviously, the pandemic has certainly brought about a conversation about the appropriate extent of government involvement in healthcare, the delivery of healthcare, issues involving long-term care. I think those are all conversations that can be had. But the major danger we have gone to here in Canada over the past several decades is having one government send money to another level of government without the adequate level of responsibility and being able to be held accountable at the ballot box. And if voters cannot hold the appropriate level of government accountable for problems in our healthcare system, well, that's what's leading to so many broken things that we do see today. So I would just close by saying that we think it's absolutely essential that the level of government that is delivering services is also the same level of government that is funding it and that can be held accountable for the mistakes and the problems that are happening in those areas. That's not the case now, and it's something we need to rectify.
Thank you, and thank you to our second panel of witnesses for your opening remarks. And so we are starting with our first round of questions. In this round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions. We are starting with the Conservatives. Have MP Lawrence for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing today. Greatly appreciate it. I will focus most of my questions to Mr. Goldberg, and so I'm very intrigued by his entanglement comments, and I will get there. But I want to start by quoting from Jack Mintz's Financial Post article and just ask a question about that. Jack writes, or Mr. Mintz writes, at one stage, all resource revenues were included in the formula. But when it meant Ontario would become a have-not province, and only half those revenues would be counted. So my question, number one, would he agree with Mr. Mintz's characterization? And secondly, does he believe that the changing of formulas with respect to the equalization is helpful or not helpful to national unity?
Well, equalization and the changes that we've seen in recent years, as Dr. Mintz noted, have created tremendous problems. And one of the things that this does is to punish provinces that are developing resources, such as Alberta, but it also serves to discourage other provinces that have potential natural resource capacity. We've seen in Quebec, for example, there's a lot of potential there. It's discouraging those provinces from trying to move forward in generating those natural resources. And that's because of in part of the way the funding agreement is structured. So it not only damages provinces like Alberta, but it discourages development in other parts of the country, which could then lead to more balanced revenue and could then lead to less of an impulse to have these equalization payments in the beginning.
Much, and you skillfully and diplomatically corrected it is Dr. Mintz there, so I appreciate your kindness there, sir. And on that, another quote from Dr. Mintz is it says, the equalization program is a tax on economic growth, especially for the smaller have-not provinces, which it creates a moral hazard, in other words, right? You already talked about that a little bit in your previous answer, but could you expand upon that?
Absolutely. The reality is that most of the resource development that we have in Canada is focused at the moment in Alberta and in Saskatchewan. But we certainly have the capacity in other provinces. We've spoken about Newfoundland and Labrador and the potentials that is there, although there's been funding issues there. There's spoken about resources that are currently in Quebec. There's some that are in Ontario as well. The problem with this funding formula or this equalization formula is that it's punishing natural resource development, which is discouraging it. But again, that's not just a problem for Alberta or Saskatchewan in this case. It's punishing those provinces fiscally. But again, it is discouraging provinces all across the country from also pursuing resource development, which could allow for economic outcomes to start to be more similar across the country as opposed to the disparity. And this is exactly why it's discouraging resource development. It's going to just perpetuate equalization and the money that is being taken out of Alberta and Saskatchewan and sent elsewhere in the country.
Thank you very much for that. And I was very intrigued by your entanglement. And I haven't read your PhD thesis, but perhaps I'll get the opportunity to, just so that I and some of my constituents can fully understand it. Your thesis, broadly put, is the fact that, correct me if I'm wrong, that a central government, a federal government that continues to creep into federal jurisdiction through the use of leveraging the funding of this will make the federal government or the provincial government, I guess, less accountable, because now you've got a disparity between the person operating it and the government funding it. Have I caught that correctly? Please expand if you can.
Yeah, very happy to expand on that. That's precisely the issue. What we've seen is that these are areas of jurisdiction, particularly healthcare, that in the Constitution were outlined as areas of responsibility for the provinces. The provinces obviously are doing a lot of the spending and the management of delivery, while the federal government is sending billions and billions of dollars to provincial governments every year. The issue that you see when that does occur is a lack of accountability. If the state of hospitals within a province are unacceptable, if we're unhappy with what's going on in long-term care, if we're unhappy with the deliverance of healthcare, well, then the provincial governments can simply turn around and say, well, we don't have enough funding from Ottawa. So ultimately, it's Ottawa's fault and not the province's fault. What you would do by transferring tax points would say, let the level of government that is constitutionally responsible for delivering these services deliver those services and fund those services, and then you can hold the appropriate level of government accountable when they fail to do so. This just simply allows for politicians at different levels to blame each other without actually achieving the proper results.
One last question. I believe I got 30 seconds. Yeah. One last question. So knowing that sometimes governments jealously guard their tax points, as you point out there, as you stated there, and that might be difficult to achieve, would it perhaps be beneficial, as the province of Quebec has been asking for, is to have less strings attached to transfers to the provinces?
Certainly, you could have less strings attached. The issue, again, would be the accountability issue. Perhaps it would be somewhat lessened if the federal government is saying, look, we're going to give this money without conditions, and therefore it's going to be up to the provincial government to accept responsibility. But it's the similar issue in that you're sending money from one level to another level to then deliver services, whereas voters are not able to hold them accountable. So perhaps that would allow for a little bit less of an issue, but again, provincial politicians will still take the opportunity to blame the federal government for a lack of funding.
Thank you. Thank you, MP Lawrence. Now we're going to have questions from the Liberals. I've got MP MacDonald for 6 minutes.
So I guess I want to continue on this conversation just a little bit, the Canadian Taxpayer Association. So in one phrase, you talked about accountability, and then you relate it to healthcare, and we're actually dealing with accountability issues in healthcare on transfer payments to the provinces. So I'm a little confused by your comments. You're talking about accountability in one sense, but on the other sense, it's a confusing message. And I just want you to clarify on the accountability measures in healthcare and the transfer payments to the provinces.
Well, this is exactly the point. There's two kinds of accountability here. One kind of accountability is if there's strings attached to funding, the federal government making sure the provincial government is doing what the federal government wants. The primary mechanism of accountability that's lacking is for voters and constituents who expect to see the deliverance of those services to actually judge the results. And so there's a difference between being accountable to a federal government that can pick any of its own criteria that it wants to judge where provincial spending is going. But that's not the same kind of accountability when you have the average citizens at the local level who do not feel that the operating of their system is sufficient.
Thank you. I'm going to flip right to the Canadian Health Coalition. And look, we've seen, and this is all kind of entangled if we use that term loosely, but we've seen in some provinces such as Quebec and British Columbia that are calling for large Canada Health transfers. Increases while cutting taxes and running large surpluses. We've just seen the Canadian Centre of Policy Alternatives published a report noting that the province of Ontario, for example, has reduced its own revenues by $7.5 billion. So what role do provinces play in our healthcare systems? So if the Canadian Health Coalition could respond to that, please.
I'll defer a little bit to my colleague Keith Newman, who's an economist, who may have some comments about this. But I actually find myself in agreement with Mr. Goldberg, because the problem has been that the provinces have successfully managed to play a kind of a bit of a blame game here and point the finger at the federal government for areas that they are responsible for. And I think the federal government and Minister LeBlanc quite rightly, pushed back on that over the summer following the meetings of the premiers in Victoria, by saying, look, we do fund a lot, and we expect to see some outcomes, and took issue with the numbers. Our current modern healthcare system wasn't even envisioned by in 1867, and so while it does fall largely to the provinces, it is a shared responsibility. The federal government does have a role in it, and its major role is through the landmark legislation that governs the billions of dollars in transfers, which is the Canada Health Act, and the 5 principles of the Canada Health Act, which are designed to make sure that we don't have the kind of balkanization and disparities in our country that I think some of the measures that Mr. Goldberg is putting forward through would result in. I'm from New Brunswick, and we're part of a national project here, and we want to have the Canada Health Act that ensures that healthcare services are accessible, portable across the country, and the federal government plays an essential role in that. So yes, the federal government is putting up money, and it has historically come to arrangements with the provinces, but it does have the right, I think, to ensure that there's accountability for that and look for some outcomes. Under the Canada Health Transfer, at a minimum, the 5 levels of the 5 principles of the Canada Health Act, plus bans on extra billing and user fees, have to be in place. And we need to see a strengthening of the Canada Health Act in particular, but also programs, special programs for healthcare programs like we're seeing with dental, like we've seen with childcare, like we would hope to see with pharmacare, where outcomes are guaranteed for the federal dollars. And increasingly, I think that's what Canadians are looking for.
Could I add a little, could I add a point on that?
Sure.
The idea that we would have a balkanized system with every province running about doing its own thing, really, obviously I don't agree with. And there are things that have to be coordinated nationally. For example, my colleague mentioned pharmacare. Well, with pharmacare, with a universal public pharmacare plan, we could, as a country, negotiate our prices. Now we have 110,000 plans. And so, we'd be much better to have one plan that we can bargain for the prices, for the drugs, and for prices, and for access, and all these kinds of things. I mean, it makes no sense to have a super balkanized system. Frankly, I'm confused about that. And secondly, this whole pharmacare thing, because it would be a national plan with all these various benefits, would save massive amounts of money. According to the Hoskins report, $16 billion a year just for employers. Yay, employers will save $16 billion a year. Individuals will save, I forget, $7 billion a year. Now, it's true the federal government will pick up some of that money, but it'll be able to save us all a lot of money, at least $5 billion, probably more a year. So that's a great thing. And that's a federal government, would be a federal government program. And there is no alternative to that.
MP MacDonald, Mr. Newman, that is the time. We are moving now to the block, and MP Saint-Marie for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to begin with a few comments before I ask my first questions, and this for Mr. Staples. But the comments are not linked with the questions I have. First, I would like to remind colleagues that provinces are regrouped together to negotiate the price of drugs and to reduce the price. So there's leverage there. And second, in response to Mr. Goldberg's statement, in no case, and I'm really very surprised by the statement, that Quebec would not want to exploit its natural resources to have more equalization. I think it's not understanding Quebec. Quebec, think of its mines, its forests, its fisheries, and so forth. Of course, we don't have the same resources elsewhere, but certainly Quebec does exploit its resources in a sustainable way. That's certainly my commitment, and we're also interested in developing our manufacturing sector. So it's very difficult to develop the manufacturing sector when there's only, a half state supporting it, and the federal government is more concentrated in other spheres of economic development, especially when you integrate into our analysis the value of the Canadian currency. We often give a name to that phenomenon, the Dutch disease. I've even seen it in my riding when you see that the value of the dollar, and this some years ago, increased in value because of the strength of the exports of the natural resource, starting with hydrocarbons. It didn't help the manufacturing sector. But when you look at what the federal government is doing in terms of economic development and the way it's going to try to mobilize the machinery, then I think that equalization, as imperfect as it is a sad consolation prize. We would like to be able to develop our economic resources to their full potential. So I just wanted to preface my questions with that. There's no question that, Quebec is not developing its resources. Thank you. So that was a comment, and now I'd like to move to my question, Mr. Chair. Mr. Staples, in the first hour of today's panel, we had Mr. Klein as a witness, and his sister has written a book on you can do things badly. It makes you able to swallow the bitter pill more easily. Now, I expect, Mr. Staples, you also object to privatization, similar for Mr. McCune. But would you agree that chronic underfunding could have led to a degradation of public services, then means that provinces that have a lack of funding tend to privatize? And if that's the case, would you say that federal cuts in healthcare do go back to the 1990s when the federal government wanted to, pay down its deficit by cutting its transfers? So perhaps, Mr. Staples, you would like to comment?
M'excuse, mais l'anglais, ce n'est pas dans le headphone. Pour moi,
So, thank you, colleagues.
Je m'excuse.
Thank you. I apologize. I didn't catch your name and I don't see it on my screen.
Did you select the interpretation for English at the bottom? There should be a globe at the bottom of your screen, and interpretation. I want to make sure that you capture everything that's being said. Thank you. Okay, you may continue, Mr. Newman.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. You are entirely correct when it comes to the federal government that during the 1990s did not do its homework. And indeed, the federal government tried to pay down the deficit on the backs of Canadians, which was a bad thing, and we were entirely opposed to that. In actual fact, it was a pretext. Austerity. The pretext was you had to balance the federal budget, which is not at all necessary. Just as we've seen recently, it's not a question of accounting. The federal government has the duty to balance the Canadian economy, not as a function of a few accounting numbers, but rather on the basis of the needs of Canadians everywhere, the Quebecers and other Canadians. But no, it did not live up to its responsibilities. And you are entirely right. And our organization is pushing the government to finance national programs, and this all across Canada. For instance, pharmacare, dental care, and programs that are far more efficient, and I say this from a standpoint of economists, much more efficient when they're financed by the central government, in this case, the federal government. And I would like to underscore that these programs are not for profit, and it's not necessarily the private sector that we're opposed to. Rather, it's a question of profit, that you make profits off the backs of sick Canadians is not correct. So in this regard, we would like the Government of Canada to establish rules. Thank you, Mr. Newman, and MP Sainte-Marie.
But thank you, and now we're moving to the NDP,
Merci.
and MP Blakey for 6 minutes, please.
Mr. Goldberg, I just thought it would be useful for the committee's deliberation if you could itemize for us or give us a list of the provinces that you think are actively discouraging natural resource development in order to maintain their equalization revenue.
If I could give an itemized list.
Do you believe are actively discouraging resource development in order to maintain their equalization revenue?
Well, what we've seen is that there are provinces all across the country that haven't done enough to develop natural resources. And pardon me?
Ideally, all of them that you think belong to that category. But you could start with one and then carry on to the others.
Well, you know, we spoke about some of the projects that could be developed in Quebec, for example. We've spoken about projects in other regions in Atlantic Canada. I think Mr. Premier Legault and others have talked about wanting to get away from equalization and better developing local economies.
Intention that those governments are actively seeking to not develop their natural resources in order to maintain their equalization revenue. You've said the Atlantic region, so I take that to mean Newfoundland and Labrador, PEI, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, as well as the province of Quebec. Are there any other provinces you'd like to add to that list?
I would not like to make a specific list. What I would say is that there are provinces that have been standing in the way of resource development or getting resources to market. That's a simple fact. And if these provinces were to improve in terms of resource development and you had greater economic growth, then naturally there would be a change to the equalization formula. And that's what happens inevitably when resources are developed.
Well, thank you for the value of that contribution. I would like to ask now Mr. Staples.
Mr. Chair, sorry, it's not appropriate to badger a witness. That's just inappropriate.
I wouldn't characterize that as badgering. I would just characterize that as offering thanks to the extent it's due. What I'm hoping to get at with Mr. Staples is some understanding of the health accord model. So, we've talked a fair bit about jurisdiction and the requirement to have an interaction between the federal government and provincial governments in respect of health spending. So we did have a model for this in 2004. It was a 10-year agreement. So when we talk about the Canada Health Transfer and increases in health funding and how to structure that, I wonder if you could speak to what you think there was of value in the health accord model, lessons learned from that period between 2004 and 2014, when it was unilaterally ended by the then federal government under the Conservatives, and what a model could look like for introducing some of those questions of accountability as between governments for health funding.
Well, thank you very much. And I may engage with Mr. Newman as well on this. He has more historical knowledge than me, but I would say for one thing, the tax transfer system that was employed for healthcare funding in previous accords has not really obviously yielded very, very much benefit. That the federal government still gets blamed for not spending enough, and even though they try to redo the calculations. And I think that there has been a lot of fudging of these percentages over the last number of months with the provinces, because it's cases of the 50-50 split, for instance, was originally envisioned for doctors and hospitals, but of course the healthcare envelope has expanded a great deal, but yet the percentage calculation maybe they're being blamed for not doing 50-50, but the overall calculation is being used for all healthcare costs. So I think there is some fudging around the numbers on here, but essentially we've got to have some kind of negotiation. We've got to find some way to break through this stalemate that we have, because the crisis continues in terms of the wait times, in terms of the terrible toll being taken on frontline healthcare workers. Meanwhile, it's just a blame game going on that we saw in Victoria this year, and we need somehow to break through this impasse between the federal government and the provinces. And I do believe that the key is in the terms of the confidence and supply agreement between the Liberals and the NDP. The 4 healthcare points are excellent, and I think can really help us rise above to a new level of negotiation between the levels of provinces and the federal government to get both programs that have deliverable outcomes, but also investments in the Canada Health Transfer that are governed by the terms of the Canada Health Act, which the 5 principles, and bans on extra billing and user fees, which are absolutely critical if provinces are going down this for-profit privatization model. Keith?
Thanks. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think, we need a model with the federal government demanding accountability. Totally agree with that, for the money that is spent, and as long as it's spent towards healthcare and not used to do other things such as reducing taxes. For example, I live in the province of Quebec, and the Charest government in I think it was 2004, I forget right now, but provided us with a tax break of $600 million, and the Conservative government was appalled by that, because they had sent them the money for the healthcare system. So it happens personally, I had no health problems. So you know what? I got a tax break. But really, that's not the kind of country I want to live in. I believe in a country that takes care of its people, and we have a duty to our country to take care of our people and to help those in our community. And by cutting back on these programs and finding ways to engage in double talk and blame the next guy is wrong. And I would say add this: if the federal government has a good program and it offers good money with strings attached, are you telling me, would somebody tell me that the provincial governments will not say, okay, we're going to reject $5 billion or $3 billion or whatever it is for healthcare or for pharmacare? Of course they won't. They will take the money as long as the federal government maintains its availability and also the strings.
Thank you, Mr. Newman and MP Blakey and members. We are moving to our second round. Like our first panel, this panel we're down to about 12 minutes or so left, and just looking at how we do it, we divide the dime equally. So in this second round, it'll be 3 minutes per party. We're starting with the Conservatives, and I've got MP Albus for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for participating in today's study. I'm going to start with Mr. Goldberg and probably finish with you because I don't have a lot of time. So first of all, you mentioned the concept of entanglement. Could you just explain what entanglement means again?
Well, the concept of entanglement is the idea that you have one level of government providing money to fund a service and another level of government trying to deliver that service, and a lack of accountability when it comes to everyday Canadians to be able to hold a particular level of government accountable for that service delivery. And in addition to that, getting levels of government involved in areas where constitutionally they're not given room to do so.
Thank you. Now, you've written a report along with Sean Spear that you've been referencing throughout this. Would you be able to supply that to the committee so we can include it as evidence in our discussions?
Certainly.
Thank you for that. Now, specific to this particular motion, because we're not just talking about fiscal federalism, and again, this was originally an NDP proposal, and in that it says talking about fiscal federalism in Canada, including but not limited to fiscal equalization payments, the Canada Health Transfer, the Canada Social Transfer, and the possibility of a new federal transfer to equalize the disproportionate costs of climate mitigation and adaptation across Canada's provinces and territories. So I'd like to just to maybe focus a little bit here, because you've talked about entanglement and some of the issues of direct accountability, whether it should be a provincial or the Canadian voter for holding their government to account. How would your concerns around entanglement be adapted to some of the discussion we've had today around some sort of new climate mitigation adaptation transfer?
Well, I think it would be a similar situation where you have right now with healthcare. I think it would be that the environment and priorities and what happens in terms of natural resources and what happens in terms of climate change obviously is going to affect different provinces in different ways. But again, this is something where if the provincial governments are taking the leadership of dealing with these issues, then the provincial governments should be those level of governments that adopt policy.
Okay. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
20 seconds or so, MP Albus.
Okay, well, maybe I'll just take the time to thank the witnesses for being here today, and again say it's good to see everyone back, and to again add my thanks to the staff that makes our FINA committee run.
Thank you, MP Albus. Thank you for that. And now we are going to hear questions from the Liberals, and I have MP Chatel for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a comment on the first hour. In the face of a climate crisis, such as the crisis we're facing now, I'm very pleased to have heard from Witness Klein. It's not the first time we are up against crises And crises can also provide opportunities. When I look at all of the big economies of the world, and they are transitioning towards green economies, and I wouldn't want us to miss the boat. So a responsible plan would be one to focus on innovation so that we can come out of this winners. Because with all transitions, there are winners and losers, and I want to be amongst the winners. So very pleased to have had that discussion. That was in passing.
The question for Mr. Staples. I have one question. What would be the impact, in your view, of providing dental care, but also daycare? You mentioned that. Is your coalition supported?
Thank you very much for the question. Absolutely, we are in support of the dental program that's being proposed, the public dental program. It is definitely an issue that we have long monitored. We have greater expertise on pharmacare, but these are equally parts of the system that were left out of the original Medicare system. And I think this is an excellent opportunity to redress some of those gaps through this dental program. Of course, millions of Canadians are now going to benefit from that. And I think that's very good for people that are trying to deal with affordability issues right now, like everybody is with rising inflation and interest rates. And this is going to be a great help. It will also, these programs also help relieve pressures on our own healthcare system because letting dental care issues go too long, people end up in the emergency rooms, and that's not where we want to be. I would add that we are supportive of universal social programs. We do recognize that this will help many people, many Canadians, but not everybody. We are concerned that at the end of this, there may be some gaps still. We have spoken to some members of Parliament who do support this eventually being a stepping stone to a universal program where everybody is covered, and we're certainly hopeful for that. But we realize that getting this program through will help a lot of people and also pave the way for the other commitments that are in the confidence and supply agreements. As you know, the 4 healthcare commitments are spread out over time, the 3 years of the agreement, and next in line is pharmacare. And we should be seeing a draft of the Canada Pharmacare Act this fall. And I hope that we have a good discussion with the committee again when that comes. So certainly, all good all around.
Thank you, Mr. Staple. Another question. Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I know it goes fast that time. So we are moving over to the block, and MP Samaria has offered his time up to MP May. So for 3 minutes.
Merci au Bloc Québécois.
Thank you to the Bloc Québécois. This is a good day for the Greens. So solidarity.
For Steve Staples and the Canadian Health Coalition, I want to say right now, because my constituents would want me to say it, we have a crisis. I'm 68 and I don't have a doctor. My husband is 74. He doesn't have a doctor. We don't have a family doctor. And I kind of worry because although we're really young and vigorous, there are older people who'd have to worry. One of the doctors in my riding said, and this is because I don't believe that the problem of healthcare and the crisis is solely about money. One of the doctors in my riding uses this expression: what's the bed to bureaucrat ratio? Would you use your imagination to imagine how one might construct measurable indicators of how a province spends money to make sure that we reduce the bed to bureaucrat ratio?
That's a great question, and certainly we do need measurements of outcomes and performance outcomes, and I think that is very important. In fact, some studies that I've seen from the OECD and whatnot say that from the amount of money that we spend, there is a discrepancy between the kind of performance that we get from our healthcare system versus other countries. So that's certainly an area of concern. But one of the points that I want to make is increasingly, as provinces move to for-profit providers to try to stem the very real issue of getting these wait times down, there's a great concern amongst healthcare advocates like myself and my colleagues that there is no indefinite pool of doctors out there, and that you're going to have doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals move from the public system over to the private system. And for good reason. We understand that working conditions may be better and more manageable. However, it's going to make the problem worse. So it's one of these perfect storm situations where we try to solve over here and make the problem worse over there in our
But I want to get in one quick question because I agree with you. We're in violent agreement. How would the situation for Canada with private versus public be affected by CUSMA? And while we have a healthcare crisis, the U.S. in private healthcare industry looks at us as a market. How are we in a different position than, say, the UK or other countries in Europe?
That's a great question, and I haven't looked at that as closely. So I wouldn't want to venture a determination, other than the fact that we all know that our healthcare program makes us really unique. I mean, without our public healthcare Medicare program, we're not that much different from our colleagues or our cousins down south of the border. And the influence of the big pharmacare, which is largely from the United States and other European countries, has been a barrier for us moving forward on pharmacare. So
thank you, and thank you. That's the time, MP May, and thank you, Mr. Staples. Now we're moving to our final questioner. It's MP Blakey from the NDP.
I'll direct my question to start to Ms. McEwen, who I think hasn't had an opportunity to answer many questions. And then if there's time remaining and folks from the Canadian Health Coalition want to jump in, I would invite them to do that. But I want to return directly to this question of privatization. First of all, to ask, I suppose, and I think Mr. Staples just touched on this. I mean, we're seeing right now a huge spike in the extent to which nursing agencies are used to fill vacancies in the public system. These are people who are available to work. They work in that industry, and Canadians are actually paying outrageous premiums in order to hire these nurses right now from private nursing agencies that are making a profit on that expenditure and have them come and work in public institutions. So clearly there is a question about appropriate spending. One of the places we might hope to see some remedy for that in the case of provincial governments that are bound and determined to carry on this expensive and broken course is at a table that the federal government has the power to convene with its spending power for provinces to talk about best practices, including when it comes to privatization and the inordinate amount of spending that's going on through private nursing agencies right now. So I guess, can you speak first of all to, like, how do Canadians benefit when governments pay for private nurses over public nurses, or do they at all? It seems to me perhaps not. And how can the convening power of the federal government be used in order to establish some fair criteria that are co-determined with the provinces that would govern the way new health spending is done in Canada?
Thank you. This is a fantastic example. CUPE has members right now. I was speaking to some in Northern Ontario last week who are working at facilities, and there are full-time, 16-hour, get lots of overtime agency nurses working beside them. And the agency workers don't have the history necessarily in the department either. So they actually ask the public workers to do more work and to take care of the agency nurses and to provide some of that continuity of care that is so important. So the agency nurses can work between institutions and travel around to fill gaps, which might help the scheduling manager, but it doesn't improve the quality of care. It actually is very disrespectful to the workers who are, that's their home station, that you're actually increasing their workload and you're not offering them the overtime opportunities, and you're paying them less than this person that's coming in, and it's really expensive. So some of the nurses I was talking to are paid $25 an hour. The agency nurses that are coming in to work alongside them are paid $60 an hour, and the temp agency that manages them are paid, get an extra $40 on top of that. So we're paying 4 times the cost of a regular nurse to have this agency nurse there working alongside, and that agency nurse doesn't have the same capacity to do the job because they're switching between organizations. So that is exactly the type of thing that we would want to sit down sit talk at a table. We gather data through CIHI in order to be able to make these types of decisions and have evidence-based discussions about where are we wasting money. And I can tell you 9 times out of 10, we're wasting it by privatizing. It's a shortcuts that we're trying to take to fix an immediate problem, to stopgap, that is actually creating cascading problems. Because now those nurses that aren't getting paid $60 an hour are ready to leave the profession because they're just not getting the respect that they deserve.
Thank you, Ms. McEwen. Thank you, MP Blakey, and on behalf of this entire committee, the clerk and the analysts and the staff and all of the members, the interpreters. This is the hardest work. I don't know if you know, the hardest working committee on the Hill. That's in our humble opinion. We may be a little bit biased here, but thank you for helping us kickstart our fall session as we study the current state of fiscal federalism here in Canada. So we wish you a great evening, and on that, we'll adjourn the meeting, members. Thank you.